When you go undercover, deep cover, you're going to become another person. You're going to become immersed into the community. The Mafia, the mob, La Cosa Nostra, whatever term you want to give to it, are the criminals Americans love to hate. You were constantly worried that they were going to find the wire, or they were going to figure out that you're not really who you are. I was 23 when I went undercover. I'm made to look like I'm a young kid with a lot of money. It sounds great that you have all this money and you're doing, but when you're eating dinner with people you don't want to eat dinner with, and you're hanging with people and you're constantly, and you're wearing a wire, and you know if you get caught with that wire, you're going to get a bullet in your head, it's not a fun time. You start to realize how bad you can become very quickly, because you become more like them. And so you start to like people. You start to get close to people. You get to know their families. So it changed my morality. You don't change the street changes you. And many of you may know that years later, I became an NBA referee.
Please welcome Bob Delaney.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Great to have you, Bob. So, Bob, you grew up an Irish Catholic kid. Tell us about young Bob Delaney.
I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey. It's in the northern part of New Jersey, across the river from New York City. My dad was a state trooper, served in World War II, Irish Catholic family, kind of leave it to beaver kind of life. I was very fortunate. And, you know, as a kid, you think everybody has that kind of life, right? I mean, it was Sundays at my grandparents' house for dinner, aunts and uncles all living within 6, 7 blocks of each other. So you had your cousins. It was a tight family unit. And I went to St. Mary's Grammar School. So St. Mary's School and the church became the whole social life, playing ball on Little League and that kind of thing. I was a pretty good baseball player, and so I assumed when the basketball team had tryouts in 7th grade that I would make it, and I didn't, and it was devastating. And as a kid, you know, that was pretty good in athletics, to not be able to be part of the team and had to go watch my buddies play. That Christmas, I got a basketball, and my parents put a hoop up in the backyard and put a concrete area. And to this day, I can still remember my mother looking out the bathroom window, watching me practice and encouraging. And then I went on, I played in 8th grade and went on to be an all-state basketball player in the state of New Jersey, and played in college as well. The thing about sports that I love is it teaches you how to be humble in winning, gracious in losing, and how to turn disappointment into motivation.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot of parents who need to hear that, who are sitting on the sidelines of their kids' Little League games right now. You are getting ready to graduate from college, and you hear that the state troopers are looking for some recruits. Tell me about that.
In 1973, I was going into my senior year, and I knew that the NBA would not be calling, and quite honestly, my thirst for knowledge didn't come till later in life, and the only reason I was in school was to play ball. And I had never thought about becoming a trooper, even though my father was. I thought I would be a basketball coach and a teacher. And for some reason, it struck me in my sophomore and junior years, that's what I wanted to pursue. And I knew if I waited, I may miss an opportunity. So I took the test and passed, and all things lined up. So I left in my senior year. I tell the players I was like them, I came out early too. Only I came out to become a cop, not get a big NBA contract. And so I worked for my dad. He was a lieutenant in the state police. And so when I graduated, I was assigned to Troop B. But the dynamic was one of, he was lieutenant or captain, he got promoted, when I was at work, and he was dad at home.
About a year and a half, you get an unexpected call. Tell us about that.
When you walk into a police station, there's a squad room. And they try to make you feel good about yourself. They have these little cubby holes with your name on as if you have your own office in there, right? And I had a note after 2 days off. I walk in, there's a note to call Lieutenant Jack Liddy, Division Headquarters, Criminal Investigation Section, Organized Crime Bureau. This guy had more titles next to his name than I ever saw. And it wasn't common for a general road duty trooper to get a call from division headquarters. And Nick, I grew up Irish Catholic. That means I wake up guilty in the morning. I thought I did something wrong. I thought I had a problem on my hands. And the other trooper said, relax, kid, give the guy a call. He probably gave you a ticket to a mob guy. He wants to talk to you, works organized crime. I called the lieutenant. He said, you can be in for a while. I said, yes, sir. He said, I'll meet you in the kitchen in about an hour and a half. An hour and a half later, I walk into the kitchen. There's this intimidating figure. Lieutenant Liddy stands about 6'4". He's got meat hooks for hands. He's the kind of guy that hangs on his lapels when he speaks to you. He's also the kind of guy that the button on the shirt has never met the hole on the shirt, you know. And after a period of time of us having conversation, he looked at me and said, are you interested in doing undercover work? I said, yes, sir. He turned and walked away. I said, Lieutenant, what is it? Drugs, narcotics? Because back then all we were doing is buy bust on the street. He said, you keep asking questions, you're going to be out of the running. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned that the President's Organized Crime Task Force out of Washington, D.C., the FBI and New Jersey State Police were joining forces. So when Lieutenant Liddy spoke with me at first, then there were other meetings that I had to go to with him. He said to me one day, we've got to meet with the major. And it was a colonel, then a major in charge of criminal investigations. And his name was Bill Baum. And he said, we got to meet with him downtown, meaning division headquarters in Trenton, New Jersey. And he said, we've got a 12 o'clock meeting with him, so make sure you're there early. 11:30, I'm waiting in the office, and 11:45 comes. Lieutenant Liddy walks into me, and he says, Major's tied up. He's not going to be able to see us till 1:30. Let's go grab lunch. And we walk into this place, and he says to me, what do you want to do, kid? Eat it or drink it? I said, whatever you do, boss. And so he says, let's go to the bar. Go to the bar. He said, we can get a sandwich, a couple of beers. And he buys me a couple of beers. We have a half a sandwich. He said, we got to get back over to meet the major. We go in and have conversation with the major. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that I learned that meeting was always set for 1:30. He just wanted to get me in a position to put me in a couple of drinks and see how I handled myself in front of a boss, so that it was a way of an evaluation of who are we going to select for these kinds of jobs. Lieutenant Liddy did this background work. He went to the death records, found a child who died at birth with the same first name, same ethnic sounding last name, same age grouping. And that was Robert Allen Cover. He was born in November 1949. I was born in November 1951. First name. Cover could be Irish, German, so there's a similarity. I became Bobby Cover, catchy name for an undercover guy. But we weren't trying to be cute or funny, but years later, it comes across a little different.
So you're selected as one of the undercover guys they're going to put you in this fake trucking company. Mm-hmm. Tell us why a trucking company and tell us what happened next.
When you go undercover, deep cover, you're going to become another person. And it's not going home at night. You're going to become immersed into the community. The idea was to set up a trucking company to truly understand how organized crime infiltrates legitimate business. Because in that time frame, organized crime was the terrorism of today. It was codenamed Project Alpha because it was the first time the FBI and New Jersey State Police had worked together. Now, you got to remember, this is back in the 70s, right? Where we are now with Joint Task Force, none of that was going on. It was like Macy's and Gimbel's back then. You had FBI agents on one quarter, state troopers on another. We weren't working together. And it was going to be controlled by Washington through the President's Organized Crime Task Force. And so myself, another state trooper, 3 FBI agents, started a small trucking company called Mid-Atlantic Air Sea Transportation at 941 Fairmont Avenue in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right at the entrance to the Port of Newark. And we thought we had this major operation. We had one 16-foot truck, we had a van and a station wagon. And the grant was written for 6 months. Like we were going to organize crime in the state of New Jersey in 6 months and move on to the next thing, I guess. I don't know. We learned very quickly that wasn't going to happen. And we had to come together and work as a team, and that took a process, but then we got lucky. A guy by the name of Patrick John Kelly was a concierge for the DiNorgio crew, the Bruno crime family, got jammed up. State police had cases on him, FBI had cases on him. He had a choice. We gave him a choice to come work with us or go to jail. He chose to come to work for us. So that's the luck that I talk about. We had an informant that was inside the mob, and he schooled us in a way, the wise guy. Because in this Mid-Atlantic trucking company, we acted as if we were 5 co-owners, the 5 undercover guys. And because we were being politically correct, like nobody's gonna be above anybody else and all this other stuff. And Pat said to us, I don't know what you're doing with 5 co-owners. He said, I never saw a bus going down the street with 5 bus drivers. Somebody's gotta be in charge. And so we started a new trucking company. called Alamo Transportation in the shadows of the Statue of Liberty in Liberty State Park in Jersey City. I became the president of that company, Pat Kelly, the vice president. Another trooper that was working became my driver bodyguard. The FBI agents took on roles of truck operations, truck managers, and at one point we had like 20 trucks hauling for us around the country. Our trucks were making 3 runs to everybody else's 1 run down on the port because we were kicking back and we have the mob behind us. And so it became a functional, real trucking company. And that was my life, running that trucking company and kicking back 25% of the profits to the wise guys. If you saw the movie The Irishman, everybody in there I paid money to. And I'm made to look like I'm a young kid with a lot of money. And my parents were killed in a car accident. We had a whole story that was not something in today's world. You Google and you'd be able to research. We were able to put it all under Pat's vouching for me. He introduces me to MAID members in organized crime in the Genovese and Bruno crime families. And so I had a Corvette. They moved me out of Bayonne up to Fort Lee, New Jersey, right at the base of the George Washington Bridge. I got a beautiful apartment. Pat and I are roommates. We're living together, but the whole place is wired. I mean, anything you do is going to be taped. And, you know, it sounds great that you have all this money and you're doing, but when you're eating dinner with people you don't want to eat dinner with, and you're hanging with people and you're constantly, and you're wearing a wire, and you know if you get caught with that wire, you're going to get a bullet in your head, it's not a fun time. Tino Fiumara was a captain in the Genovese crime family. He was either called George. George in mob speak means good. Tom means bad. And so it's their whole language. Like if you're sitting at a restaurant and they'll say to me, Bobby, your car is double George. That means, but you also may hear somebody say, Tom is riding the Erie, Lackawanna, meaning the railroad. What they're saying to you is someone's listened to our conversation at another table. So you had to learn this whole subculture that you became a part of. It's a language, it's a demeanor. It's also knowing who you can kiss on the cheek and who you can't kiss on the cheek. Like, I was never at a kiss on the cheek with Tino Fiumara as the boss, but his underlings, his underbosses and all, I got to that kind of respect level. But that was his way of keeping me at arm's length. You know, you're not in here. You're here to make money for me. That's your job. And so there's an intimidation factor taking place at all time. And I would add the additional for me was wearing a wire. Back in the day, you would think every undercover cop had a truck outside listening, right? But they became very adept at that. They had ways of checking for transmissions so you would get wanded when you went into meetings or you went into dinners. And so we got a reel-to-reel small tape recorder. We thought we were 007 back then, but I mean, it's crazy now to think of it. It was reel-to-reel called a Nagra. And I would put it where you would wear the cup if you were playing sports inside a jock. And I had on-off switches in my pockets and I had 2 microphones under my armpits. I tell people I got a lot of 2-for-1 meals because when you're eating and you're wearing that and you're sitting across from them, the food's coming up and going down, coming up and going down. You're trying to keep it, pushing it down because you know if they find you with that thing, you're getting whacked. There's no doubt about it. They're gonna think you're in a form. But there was a code, as strange as it sounds. That's why I believe the Mafia, the mob, La Cosa Nostra, whatever term you want to give to it, are the criminals Americans love to hate because there's a family structure. And I think that was the attraction with The Sopranos. I think a lot of people would have liked to have been like Tony, but not do it with physical assassinations, do it with character assassinations, right? That takes place in the business world on a daily basis. People undermining other people. And so I think there's an attraction there that takes place. It's an interesting human dynamic.
Okay, so you become Bobby Covert. You set up with your 1 truck, your station wagon, you're ready to rock. What's your first move to try to get into the mob?
We start doing some stolen property. You know, we're at the port. Back in those days, there were a lot of loads coming off the port, but we weren't set up just to buy stolen property. It wasn't a sting operation. We did reverse stings. We bought things at a low price and then like offed them to people as if it was stolen property, so they thought we were in that business and that this trucking company is willing to do more than just be a trucking company. The comical part was like 3 months into the job, we're wondering why the unions aren't knocking our doors down. Because to cop mentality, this is a big operation. It's $1 million in 1970s by the federal government to put into this.
What happened with your previous relationships, your parents, your relatives, your friends, your coworkers? What'd you get to tell them, or what could you tell them?
No, I couldn't tell them anything. In the state police, there's a personnel order that comes out every day. The personnel order that came out on April 9th, 1975 said that I resigned from the New Jersey State Police. I left the station in the middle of the night. Lieutenant Liddy came. I didn't sign out of what our normal procedures were. I was just gone. And then all kinds of rumors started going. It's like being at your own funeral and hearing things about, I got jammed up down in Florida. I got this, I got that. They're trying to take care of the kid, get him out without getting any criminal charges against him. There were all kinds of rumors going around me. And I just faded away. The only people that knew were my parents, my sister, and my grandparents. I opted to bring my grandparents to the house one night and tell them that their grandson had not gone bad, that I was doing undercover work. That resulted in my grandparents almost burning down churches, lighting candles out of concern. But I'm glad I did it because my grandmother on my mom's side passed during the time that I was undercover. And it would have been kind of difficult to live with knowing that she didn't think that I was still the same guy.
So as you're living this, 6 months goes by, a year goes by, how are you feeling as a person? Are you starting to live this lifestyle? Are you starting to like anything about this lifestyle? Are you doing late night dinners? What's it like?
Yeah, I gained probably about 25, 30 pounds when I was undercover. It's stress eating. It's also middle of the night going over to Little Italy in New York. So you got to be up early in the morning. You're up late at night. There's no time for working out. There's none of this normal lifestyle. As I said before, it's a subculture. We only went to each other's houses, and you only stay in that small group. You start to like people. You start to get close to people. You get to know their families. And then you start feeling guilty inside because you're saying to yourself, I know where this is going to end up, and it's not going to end up good for you. And it's tough when you know they're kids. There was a lot of emotional roller coaster, because your morality changes on the street. I tell people, staying on the street is like living in a toilet. If you stay in a toilet long enough, you're going to start to stink. And my morality changed. What I saw as a bad guy, as a uniformed trooper, and early days of undercover, I just saw it as a guy making a living. He's stealing to make a living. He's taking down stolen loads. He's doing drugs or he's selling guns. He's doing it to put food on his table. To me, the only bad guys then were the guys putting bullets in people's heads. So it changed my morality, but I couldn't verbalize that to anybody because then I would look like people would look at me like, what are you talking about?
Obviously, there's lots of personalities and lots of different families, and they're jockeying for stuff. Did you get proposals from different, come with us, do this? How's this gonna work? Tell me about that.
Yeah, when it first started out, it was the Brunos and the Genovese. But then the Genovese wanted to steal me away, and because they're looking at splitting 25%. That's 12.5% each off of the trucking company. Well, they're starting to see that I've got more and more money, and now they're saying, oh, we want the whole 25%, maybe 30%. Tino comes to me one day with Michael and Pat, and we're sitting down. He said, I'm going to tell you, we're going to start this new company. You're going to go find a new location. It's going to be called Liberty Tire Truck, and it's going to be a company that fixes tires for large trucking companies. And I said, okay. I said, we're going to have to get a license. He says, no equipment. You need an office. He says, our guys will do the sales work. They go out to trucking companies and they say, here's a bill for 2 tires this week, $400 a piece. That's $800 that you owe us this week for the tires. If you don't want to pay it, you're going to have about 20 tires that are going to be bad. And so there was an intimidation figure and so all we had to do was set up the company. And then they started moving and everybody's making a move on you, right? And then I'm trying to play both ends of the middle from an investigative standpoint. At one point, we went down to Florida at Joe Sonkin's Gold Coast restaurant in Hollywood, Florida. Pat and I fly down there. We were at the restaurant one night. Louis Crescenzi said he wanted to expand the restaurant. And Tino said, how are you going to expand it? He says, I've got a whole downstairs area that's really, I think I could really fix up. And he said, it's even some dirt area that I would have to do. Tino says, let's go see it. And I'm like, I don't want to go see it. In my head, I can't verbalize that. Now we got to go down these steps, but Tino and Michael are behind me. And now I'm thinking, we're going down these steps into a place. I mean, my heart rate had to be going like 104, 150, but you got to stay calm and you got to push those emotions down. You were constantly worried that they were gonna find the wire or they were gonna figure out that you're not really who you are. After that meeting we had down in Florida, Michael Coppola called the trucking company and he said, T wants to meet you over by the tunnel, meaning the Holland Tunnel. If you came out of the Holland Tunnel back then, there was a diner that was right outside the Holland Tunnel, and that was a meeting spot. And so I said, Pat, Michael just called. I said, I'm not wiring up. If they know we were just down with Johnny Keys, and they know that we're down there romancing the Bruno family down in Florida, they're not gonna be happy. I'm not wiring up. I don't think you should wire up. This is not good. I'm not feeling comfortable. Call the lieutenant, tell him what we're doing. We go down, we go to the diner. At the diner is Larry Ricky, who is another of Tino's guys, is the driver. And Tino's in the front seat. And as we get out of our car, I think we're going to the diner. They motion us to get in the car. Now I'm like, we're going mobile. This is not good. I'm okay being in the diner, but we're gonna go mobile now. They say, get in, and I get in the back seat. It's unheard of with a mob guy getting in their back seat. So I'm in the back seat, and now I've got my briefcase, which was one of those old leather hard briefcases. And Pat gets behind Larry Ricky. Tino's in front of me, I'm here, and Pat. And now very quickly I realize we're back to talking about the new trucking company. He has no idea that so you start getting more relaxed. What have you found, he says to me, about where you want to put this trucking company? He says, I want it down neck north because we got down neck north. I said, well, T, I looked at a couple of places and I took the briefcase and I clicked it and it was click, and all hell broke loose in that car. He came over the top swinging his hand, people yelling, screaming, and I'm like, yo, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm looking at Pat like, get this thing under control. In Tino's mind, he heard the click of a gun. It reminded you of the seriousness of what takes place in their life and that they all are on edge at all times. But it also took me down a path for about 48 hours of thinking about how I could actually kill this guy, because I knew he was a bad guy. This guy had killed people. The guy sitting in the other front seat, we knew was another bad guy. Then I'm like rationalizing, if I open that and he lets me in the back seat again, the click's not gonna mean anything to him, I could have a gun in there. And then I'm thinking, but then if I whack him, I gotta shoot Larry, and I gotta shoot Pat. I'm killing everybody in my head, in this fantasy world that I'm living in. And you start to realize how bad you can become very quickly. And, obviously nothing takes place, but you start to bring yourself back and say, you gotta be aware of the route you're going. This is not good. You've allowed yourself to get to be as bad as them.
So by this point, you're a few years into this, and a 6-month thing, you really had no idea what you were getting into. I mean, even though they told you, you didn't understand what it really was going to be.
I thought 6 months, man, is like, this is cool. I'll probably get a detective's badge out of it. It'll be a fun thing to do. And then by the first year, you're like, okay, in the second year, and then as you go into the third year, like, I just need out of this thing. I need out. I can't do this anymore.
How did you get out of it?
It was decided that the operation would end. Lieutenant Liddy came to me one day and said, we're gonna be closing it down. And then we'll have a raid, and we gotta get Pat ready for relocation. So for anyone that's ever participated in something like that, you muster up around 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. It was uniformed troopers, state police detectives, FBI agents, and we were at the West Orange Armory in West Orange, New Jersey. I'm at the command post. I walk in plain clothes. I got nothing on me that says I'm a state trooper. And people are looking at you with jaw on the side. They think they know you. They don't. And I run past Bobby Scott, my old partner, who's now a detective. And he looks at me and he says, I don't know whether to hug you or punch you. And so we reunited there. Around 4 in the morning, they go out and start hitting houses. They come in. It was 2 uniformed troopers, FBI agent, state police detective, made up teams of 4, and they started picking up defendants. We picked up 30 that first raid. Over 100 were arrested in this investigation. I was assigned to be with Sergeant Barry Lardier, and Sergeant Lardier was in plain clothes, but he had that state police ID on the outside of his pocket. And at one point he said to me, you want to go downstairs and see what's going on, meaning they're bringing the defendants in, there's fingerprinting, there's pictures, they're shooting them off into rooms to see who's going to be the next informant, intelligence officers. And I said yes when I meant no, because now they're going to really know who I am, and I got to go eye to eye. And I'm standing next to Sergeant Lartier, and a guy named Ronnie Sardello was being fingerprinted by a trooper. Knew Ronnie really well, been to his house for dinner, knew his wife, knew his kids. And as they're putting the cuffs back on him, he looks over at me and just says, "Bobby, what'd they pinch you for?" And before I can answer, Sergeant Lartier said, "He's not pinched, he's with us, he's a trooper." And the look that went between Ronnie and I was not one of anger. It was one of hurt and disappointment. He looked at me and said, "Bobby, how can you do that to us? How can you do it to me? I'm your friend." Freeze frame, go back to St. Mary's Grammar School, Patterson, New Jersey. I was in 5th grade. I got caught doing something by Sister Joseph Rozier. She told me I was going to be punished. Before she gave me the punishment, I said, "Sister, Jimmy DeLello's doing it too." I gave up my best friend in a heartbeat. She gave me a shot in the head. She said, "Delaney, you don't tell on your friends. It's an unwritten rule in a schoolyard, you don't tell on your friends. And what we ask undercover people to do is become friends with people and tell on them." That emotional, I used to call it an emotional roller coaster. It was like emotional violence inside of me was going on because I couldn't verbalize to another trooper or FBI agent that I felt bad about locking some of these guys up, not all of them, but some of them. And they would think I went bad and I'm on the other side. So you're internalizing all this emotion, and you really don't know how to navigate it. And it starts taking you down paths.
So you guys have this exchange. You have a realization of this is sort of a sign of things to come, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you do next? Do you go run in the streets and tell everybody, "Hey, I promise I wasn't a bad guy"? Like, what happens next?
Yeah, within 3 to 4 days, within a week, I'm called back to division headquarters, and Major Baum, who I had first met with, and Lieutenant Liddy, who is now Captain Liddy, is in there. They play a recording with an innuendo conversation where there was innuendo of threats against my life. I had state troopers that lived in my home. Anywhere I went with troopers everywhere. And it's an invasive way in your life, but until they got it to where they were comfortable. I was being paraded around the country. I testified before the United States Senate, gave a briefing to Congress. They wanted to hear about this undercover job, this trucking company that had made this tremendous impact into organized crime. And I became the voice of it. And I was speaking at Jersey City Police Academy, and a guy in the audience was Dr. Henry Campbell, who happened to be my psychology professor at New Jersey State University. And he and I started doing some informal therapy, and he was the first one that said to me, "Bobby, what you're going through is post-traumatic stress." I said, "Hank, get out of here. I'm reading about this. It's a military thing." This is in the late 70s into 80s where they started just talking about post-traumatic stress. It didn't become a diagnosis till 1980. And I pushed him away. And then I got lucky for the third time. A guy named Louis Free, who was a street agent, an FBI agent, became the 15th director of the FBI. And Louis knew I was going through some difficult times, and he introduced me to another guy by the name of Joe Pistone, who you know is Donnie Brasco. And the first time I spoke with Joe, and I looked in his eyes and I heard his words and I read his body language, I knew he got what I was going through. That was my first introduction to what I call peer-to-peer conversation. I used to call it peer-to-peer therapy, but I take away every medical sounding term when having this conversation because my belief is we have over-medicalized this conversation and we're scaring people away from having the conversation. This is not mental illness. These are human conditions, normal reaction to abnormal situations. And when folks are going through this, we've got to give them the support to be able to say and talk about what they're feeling. Emotions need to be expressed. And yet we tell people, don't cry. You're a man, don't cry. All these kinds of structures and roadblocks come in the way for us.
So you go through all this, you testify from the Senate at 29. Mm-hmm. This gives you a sense of closure. And you're going to be a state trooper the rest of your life, or we know that's clearly not the case. What made you decide to leave, the police force, and what did you want to do next? As
I was going through these emotional upheavals, the only thing that was drawing me and making sense to me was getting back on a basketball floor because that's what I did in high school. And it always gave me an inner peace. And I knew I couldn't play anymore, so I started refereeing. And we had calmed down the waters, and it's years later. It's not like it happened 1 year after. I mean, these are years later. I start refereeing high school ball. And I happened to be working a game, and a guy by the name of Daryl Garrettson was the director of officials for the NBA, came out of the stands, and he was looking and scouting officials and said, would you be interested in the NBA? I said, never thought about it. He put me into the minor leagues, which was the Continental Basketball Association. I continued as a state trooper, worked those games on weekends or part-time. I was working at the academy at the time, running the Institute on Organized Criminal Groups, which became a world-known organized crime school. In 1986, he came to me and said, are you interested in going full-time? And the next year I was hired full-time into the NBA. So I started, Julius Erving officiated, then all through the Larry and Magic years and into the Bad Boys, who really taught us how to referee. If you could referee Ricky Mahorn and that whole crew, Billy Lambier and all those guys over there. And then it went into the Michael era, and then Shaq and Kobe and Kevin Durant and up to LeBron and even Steph. I remember Steph Curry when he was a little kid because his dad, Del Curry, played for the Charlotte Hornets, and Del could shoot too. Del was a phenomenal shooter.
During this, your undercover years and your NBA years, you're suppressing emotion for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Did you ever worry someone would recognize you from your mob days on the court, on TV, on any of those things?
Well, you kind of knew that was going to happen, right? I mean, it's hiding in plain sight. To this day, I still get reports from the state police and FBI on some mob figures that are still alive. Most of them are dead now or have either died natural deaths, ended up being killed, or in jail. All that kind of thing plays in your head. I was interviewed one time, and Bennett Salvatore was with me, he was another referee. I was telling the sports writers the same kind of answer, in that, I had to go live my life, and I had to make a decision, but I'm still very cautious. Bennett said, that's all well and good, but if you notice, nobody stands next to Bobby during timeouts.
At what point did you decide to tell your story? In the NBA, did the players know your past?
There was that notoriety after the undercover job, but then it kind of died down.
Well, the abuse you take as an NBA official doesn't seem so bad.
They didn't put it out there that there was this cop that became an NBA referee. Jackie McMullen, who's a writer for the Boston Globe, did Larry Bird's book, knew my story, and she always wanted to tell it. They opted to hold back on having it told by the NBA. David Stern and Daryl Garrettson held it back. And then at one point, Daryl said to me, he says, I don't want you to be known as an undercover cop who became a referee. I want you to be known as an NBA referee. I want them to know who you are. And then Jackie did a very large story in Boston, and then it became well known, and that changed everything because now players wanted to talk to me about the mob guys all the time. Chris Mullins is a flat out mob historian. He's telling me about stuff. And I'm walking on the court one night, and Grant Hill was playing for Orlando Magic, and he was in street clothes. He was hurt. He came over and pat me down and asked if I was wired. I said, I am, but for ABC, not for any other reason. Kobe came up to me one time, right off the tip in a game, the Lakers, and we were in the Forum. Off the jump ball, player goes from the other team, and Kobe hits him, and I got a foul, and I turn 24. And as I turn, I see Kobe walking towards me. And I'm thinking, man, it's going to be a long night if he's going to complain about this call. I mean, he hit this guy. And for those of you that remember, Kobe would have a scowl on his face at times. He would give it to referees, to Phil Jackson. He'd give it to his players. He'd give it to opponents. And he had this scowl as he's walking towards me. And he walks up to me and he goes around me and comes on this side and he leans down and he says, what was it like wearing a wire with those mob guys? If you look at the tape, Mike Breen on ABC is saying, Kobe's giving Delaney an earful on that call, but he was more interested in knowing what it was like with the mob guys. So
that's amazing. So you share your story in the book Covert, My Years Infiltrating the Mob. You published it in 2008. You now are clearly starting to understand how suppressing your emotion for this long has affected you. And I assume you have a realization that PTSD is a tough thing to talk about. You have it. What do you decide to do next to try to maybe help some other people?
What I started doing is when I was teaching and speaking, I would let a little bit more of my story come out with real emotion.
And I thought that day was going to be the greatest day of my life when I came back to the fold, that I was part of the New Jersey State Police again. And yet I found it to be one of the most difficult days of my life.
Talking about what I experienced as an undercover. So my bosses started to hear about me talking about the emotions of law enforcement. And they said, we want you to talk to the uniforms, and meeting the uniform troopers. And I said, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in uniform. I'm not gonna have a lot to equate to them. But then it struck me that every Jersey trooper is gonna have a fatal accident. And that first fatal accident is something that is traumatic. And mine was 3 months on a job, 2 kids on a motorcycle with a truck on Route 202 down in Flemington, New Jersey. You don't have to go into the graphic details, but I was with Gary Rinker, a senior trooper who had been down this road many times. And when you get to a fatal accident, there's not much to do. Once it's deemed fatal, there are fatal accident experts that come out to handle that scene. You hold it down. And I could feel my legs shaking underneath my uniform, because they can put photographs up of homicides and fatal accidents all they want in the academy, but until you see death in its truest form, do you understand it? And my biggest concern was that Gary was gonna see my legs shaking under my uniform and think I was weak and I couldn't do this job. We got back to the state police station. I went in the bathroom and I went into a stall and I cried my eyes out. And I sobbed quietly in hopes that no other trooper would hear me, because my interpretation was they would not want to go on patrol with me. I was weak. And when I told that story, over half the room came up to me on the break and said, I've gone through the same thing. So I became a student of post-traumatic stress. I wanted to learn everything I could about it. I studied it. I met with people. I went to seminars. I went to programs. I got my master's in leadership from St. Mary's College of understanding, because I believe it's leadership, resiliency, self-care, and understanding trauma is the work that I do now. And for those that I work with in law enforcement, firefighters, military, and now healthcare workers, at times the uniforms they wear makes them think they can leap tall buildings in a single bound. I can handle it. They are givers in the game of life. They're serving others. At times, they forget to take care of themselves. So I underline that self-care does not mean selfish. And we need to take care of ourselves in order to be the best that we can. My wife, Billy, is a flight attendant for Delta. She's flying international for years. I remind people of that and say, what do the flight attendants say to us when that mask comes out of the ceiling with the briefing? We're supposed to put the mask on us first. Gotta take care of us in order to help someone else. Self-care does not mean selfish.
So you do a lot of work now talking about PTSD, bringing it to the surface. What else are you up to now?
I was tapped by the military 20-some years ago. General Dempsey, General Odierno, General Cohn, General Brown, all these guys, they liked the message that I told. General Odierno said it best. He said, you're an undercover guy who goes in the NBA, and then you talk about post-traumatic stress. And you tell your story. You don't point fingers. You point fingers at yourself. You allow them to connect the dots. So they would send me to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I would be embedded with troops and live there and spend time sharing this story, but to be able to get them to talk about their stories. Because one thing about our military, they're amazing men and women, but if you put that word hero next to their name, they don't want to hear it. They're pushing you away. It's not, this is my job, sir. And so getting them to tell their stories is difficult because they think they're being braggadocious. And helping them understand by telling those stories, it's getting the air out of the balloon.
I have one more question. Did you ever see Pat Kelly again?
Yeah, I did see Pat Kelly again. Pat was on relocation. I'm working a game in Phoenix. Some guy is yelling from the sidelines in a front row seat. He's yelling, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby. And you ignore all this kind of stuff on the outside, because even if it's somebody you know, you got to look focused. You're not going to go over and shake hands. Then he starts yelling Bobby Covert. And now I'm thinking, this guy loves a little bit more than the Irish beer. And then he yells Alamo Trucking. And now I look over and I'm staring at this guy and I can't, and he's going, it's Pat. It's Pat. It's Pat Kelly. He's sitting courtside at an NBA game at the Phoenix Suns. And now my head is spinning. I'm like, how is this guy sitting courtside? He's on relocation, sitting next to a beautiful woman. I get the ball boy to go over with a note and say, I'm staying at the Marriott Mountain Shadows. If you can meet me for a drink after the game, we'll meet there. We reconnect. The woman that he's with leaves to go to the ladies' room. I said, Pat, does she know? He goes, no. He said, I'm living kind of common law with her, and she's got a lot of money, and so she got season seats and and all this other stuff. And it's like, you cannot make a lion into a house pet. They're gonna go back to what they do. And he was figuring out how to scam people even in relocation. And one day I get a call from another referee, a guy named Jason Phillips. He said, I just worked a game in Phoenix. And this woman like kept calling over to me and sent a note to the locker room that you have to call her. When I saw and I called and she said, Bobby, Pat died. And when she told me Pat died, he died of a heart attack. And she said, in my mind, I'm thinking, for him to die of natural causes, that's a life well lived. But what was powerful is when the book came out, I got an email from his granddaughter. And his granddaughter's email said to me, I want you to know, I appreciate you telling us about our grandfather because we always knew there was more to the story, but we didn't know it. No one ever spoke about it. And when I read it, I want you to know that his 10 grandchildren are somewhere in the military, somewhere in real estate. One has a restaurant, one's going to be an FBI agent, one's in law enforcement. And she said a powerful statement. She said, I know you know the lives you have saved, but I want you to know about the lives you have created. And I underline that to law enforcement officers, to military. It's not only about saving lives, you're creating lives. You're giving people an opportunity to live their life in whatever way they wish to live it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Delaney.
Thank you.